What is up, guys? This is going to be a real fun one. Oh boy. So, what's the topic of today? Well, the topic is ZZ no longer being in the big three, declared by yours truly, Jay McNeil. So, why do I think ZZ shouldn't belong in the big three? Well, we're going to dive into that, but before we do, I need to preface this because there are some things that will be taken out of context, and if I can prevent that in any capacity, that is a good thing. So, when I say ZZ does not belong in the big three, I am talking specifically about two-handed solving. If you haven't figured it out by now, all of my rambles are about two-handed 3x3 solving because that is what I'm into. That is my thing. So, OH, you know, say what you want about ZZ, I do think it could be comparable to CFOP, but it is still definitely worse than Roux for one-handed. Roux is... I'm pretty sure it's where it's at for one-handed, guys. Sorry to say. And I'm sad about that as well, because I'm one-handed solver, and I'm not using the best method. So that's a shame. What other events could ZZ be good for? Well, I don't think it's particularly good for FMC, because none of the big three are really good for FMC. I think we can all agree with that. Multi, no. Three blind as such, no. So... There is one event, and I'm not even bullshitting here. You're gonna find this funny, and you're gonna be annoyed about what I'm gonna say. I unironically, legitimately think ZZ is the best method for feet. Alright, so let's unpack that a little bit before we move on to the actual video, because I do think it's quite funny. So with feet solving, the way I see it, in order to be good at feet solving, I mean, you have to have your turning down, obviously, but that's not too hard. And because you're turning at such a slower pace, things like efficiency become much more important. And because rotations with feet are kind of annoying, then that gives ZZ a bit of a bump. And because of the block building nature of ZZ, you can get some really efficient solutions, usually a little bit better than CFOP, while also avoiding rotations. On top of that, with feet, I mean, just one look last layer and like being really efficient in general for your last layer becomes a really, really big deal. So because of those three things, and because of just like how ZZ works as a whole, I legitimately think ZZ is a lot better for feet than CFOP and Roux will ever be. Isn't that great news for all the ZZ users? Yeah, my method's good for feet. I can't wait to do feet practice because feet's going to be an event. I'm so happy. So yeah, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but unless you're a feet enthusiast, then if you're not a ZZ enthusiast, you probably just shouldn't be using ZZ. So anyways, point being, everything I'm saying is framed within the context of two-handed solving. If you comment, what about for OH? Well, it's good for OH. I'm gonna have to declare you a silly willy. I'm sorry, I just gotta do it. It's not your fault. It's kind of your fault. Also, last thing I'll mention before I get into it, I will not be talking much about Roux in this video. I do believe it is in the top two methods, and I already said I'm convinced it's better for one-handed. I could be convinced it's better for two-handed. I've had controversial opinions in the past where I think Roux is objectively worse for two-handed, but I've seen the fallacy in some of my arguments, so now I'm much more open-minded, unlike with ZZ. Sorry, kids. However, due to a personal lack of knowledge with Roux, I will not be talking about the method as much. That being said, I have no doubt in my mind that a prominent Roux user amongst us could make a similar video to the one I'm making, but instead of relating their arguments more to the steps of Roux, whereas I will be relating it to the steps of CFOP, which is probably a little bit easier since ZZ is very closely related to CFOP, and as you'll see later in this video, the best variant of ZZ is in fact CFOP. But I'm basically just saying I would like a prominent Roux user to make this kind of video, but in the context of Roux, to add more fuel to the fire. I'm looking at you, Keon. Keon. Rhymes with neon. You too, Yuri from Brazil. Who else uses Roux? I don't know. They're probably the only two people I would trust to make this video. I mean, Kevin could, I just don't think he will. Okay, so enough about that. Moving on. So let's talk a little about ZZ. So ZZ is not completely terrible. There are things that I do like about it. So I'm just going to like list out things that I like about ZZ, and then things that I think are like so-so, and then the things that I think are just quite problematic to say the least. So, nice things about ZZ. Despite what you may think, I actually think EO has some validity as a step. It is, at the very least, an interesting approach to solving the cube. And with things like EO, you open up the opportunity for things like ZBLL, which is why EO tricks in general, I think, have caught on for CFOP. And the other thing is that Last Layer is slightly improved because of EO. and it's heavily improved if ZB is implemented. So like using ZB with CFOP, but not forcing ZB every time, because that's not smart, I think. Versus using it every time with ZZ. So basically, because of the way ZZ works, you're going to get ZB more than you are going to get it in CFOP, and because of that, your recall will naturally be a little bit better with ZZ, and as such, that kind of buffs ZB for that method. But if you know anything about ZB, you know how little time it saves, if any at all. So it's not a big pro, but it is something, and I have to throw it in there and give ZZ credit where it's due, which is not very often, unfortunately. So, things that are kind of so-so about ZZ. RUL block building. So, it can be good, or it can be awkward. Generally, it's awkward. So, the reason it's awkward is just to do a switching between, like, righty turning and then having to, like... I mean, I'm doing obnoxious regrips right now. I don't know why I haven't really cubed properly all day. But yeah, switching from RU stuff to LU stuff is generally annoying, and especially with overturning thrown into the mix for block building, it gets pretty ugly fast. Like with block building, you might have to do something, you know, something like that with like an overturning where basically like the grip you start in will not be the grip you finish in, which is just annoying. And especially if you're switching between right hand and left hand with that happening at the same time, it can get really ugly, is my point. So that's the one thing that's like kind of so-so about ZZ. I can't say that RUL block building is always bad. There's going to be some kid from Reddit who comments on how, oh, but what about like this reconstructed solve? It flows really nice here. And like, yeah, I'm sure the stars can align and I'm sure there's good cases, but I think it's more interesting and productive to discuss methods in terms of what will generally happen in the solve. So that's the one thing that's like kind of so-so about ZZ. And then the other thing I don't really like is EO line as a step. And this is just from seeing like all the fast ZZ solvers and, you know, actually I'm not going to say that. Yeah, just from seeing ZZ solvers, EO line as a step, it kind of feels slower than CFOP cross, which makes sense because EO it has a lot more like planning involved, and as such it can take up a lot more of the 15 seconds of inspection to find that EO line as opposed to a CFOP cross, which I mean makes sense. But then when you realize that that step is slower, then in order for ZZ to probably be worth it, like taking LL out of account because it's such a small part of the solve at the high level, or I shouldn't necessarily say that, I just mean small in terms of time. But when you're comparing the fact that EO line is probably slower than cross, then RUL block building has to be faster than F2L, and I just don't think it is. So with that segue, we're going to move on to the things that I think are quite unfortunate, bad, terrible with ZZ. So like I said, after EO line, which is arguably slower than cross, you can show me exceptions to the rule. It doesn't negate the rule. You have one thing in particular is you have really nasty blind spots. Like with F2L, like your bad blind spots are like these. I mean, if you're a righty dominant solver, like these is like a half blind spot. This is like a total blind spot, this pair. And then everything else, you know, these four cross edges, it's all Gucci. With ZZ, again, you will have partial blind spot there, bit more of a blind spot over here, and especially back here. But you'll also have a blind spot here and here. So you're looking like this, and you've got blind spots on the bottom face. So I don't know if anyone's ever tried solving a 4x4 with reduction after learning Yao, but having a look on the D face, it gets bad real quick, yo. It's not good stuff. So yeah. Like I said before, because cross is probably faster than EO line, the block building would have to be faster than F2L. And just so people know, in case you haven't been watching top CFOP solvers recently, the top dudes, they're doing sub 4 F2L including cross. I really, really, really don't see the same level of potential in block building. I just don't see it. I don't think EO line plus the RUL block building, the way ZZ was intended to be done by Mr. ZZ, I just don't think it can get to that level. And it needs to be able to get to that level for the LL argument to have any weight whatsoever. Another thing that's kind of annoying and just like generally terrible about ZZ is because block building has more quote-unquote cases, and when I say cases, I mean there's just more like variants to the situations you'll encounter when you're trying to solve blocks. Automation of solutions, you know, automation of, you know, how you solve cases, it becomes a huge issue, especially for things like look ahead and keeping your TPS up. Because if you've got all these cases, I don't think it's realistic for someone to learn block building in a truly algorithmic manner. And because of that, look-ahead is just naturally going to be a bit worse than it would be with CFOP, because it just becomes that much harder for you to do look-ahead, like I described in my 99% of look-ahead videos suck ramble, which you should definitely check out. It's a good video. But yeah, basically, you see pieces, and when you're looking ahead, you want to see those pieces, and you want to be able to like draw your attention to something else and solve them without even thinking about it. Just have muscle memory take over. Good luck getting muscle memory to take over with block building. I don't know if the Roux users can really do it that well, and despite that, they're still competing with CFOP, so there you go. So that causes issues, and then there's also TPS, because if you really want to try and let muscle memory take over and have that look-ahead mindset, you're almost definitely going to have to sacrifice TPS. Like, no matter what, it's either going to be look-ahead or TPS. There has to be some sort of sacrifice made. So that's the thing that's pretty sucky about ZZ, in my opinion. The last thing that I don't really like about ZZ, or second last I should say, I've got the big one saved for last, because you can't really rotate, or at least you traditionally shouldn't rotate with ZZ, because that's the point of the method. Because, you know, rotations are so slow, they're just so hard to do. Like, I just don't know how to do them, man. They're just really hard and take up so much time. But yeah, because of that, your fate is mostly determined for you, in the sense that if you have to end with like a crappy thing in the back left slot, unless you're willing to do a Y2, then that's just kind of how you got to deal with it. The only other exception to this rule is when you have, so let's just say we're doing orange on front ZZ, and then this is our last pair, and we don't know how to do commutators because we suck at cubing and spend too much time on Reddit. Because you have the edge solved, when you have an edge solved, or even an edge in like... Actually, with ZZ, it's just whenever an edge is in another slot. So if you've got an edge in another slot like that, or like that, then you can rotate, and you can finish the solve as technically rotationless, but you did throw a rotation in there. So that is like an efficiency that could be added to ZZ. However, that would only work when you've already... Basically, there can't be any edges in the U layer that belong in F2L, otherwise a rotation will unorient it. However, I don't think this is an efficiency ZZ users are willing to use because they think rotationless solving is like God to them or something. And the real last thing that I really don't like about ZZ, good luck being color neutral with any ZZ variant whatsoever. Color neutrality is a big deal. I'm sorry, it just is. Maybe not for Roux, because, you know, Roux's special and it's got all these crazy advantages. ZZ, yeah. So, before we move on a bit further, I want to first touch on a bit of the historical context of the big three methods. So basically how long these methods have been known, how long they've been in circulation online, and how long we've had prominent people using these methods. So we'll talk about CFOP. It has the longest history by far. Eric Ackersdyke actually informed me a little earlier that it goes back to as early as 1981, although back then they were using CLL and ELL instead of OLL and PLL. But other than that, Cross and F2L were already an established method. So that method, CFOP, maybe the best method, but that method is nearly twice my age. So I'm 20 and CFOP is 38. That kind of blew my mind, honestly. It's nearly twice my age. Like, what the hell? That's kind of messed up. But yeah, so CFOP, I don't think I need to convince people that it's by far the most explored and developed and pushed method in the cubing meta. I feel like that kind of speaks for itself. Now for Roux, I'll talk a little bit about Roux. So it originated around about 2004. Mr. Roux from France, he posted like a website with the method. I think he uploaded some solves. And it did catch on. It's obviously not as popular as CFOP, but I don't think it's unpopular to the point where there's something untapped with the method that's going to like really change everything. I think it's been in circulation long enough, just like CFOP has, that we have like a 99.9% idea of like what high-level Roux probably looks like. Although we'll have a ramble on that in the future, hopefully, about my thoughts on where Roux could head based on where CFOP is heading in terms of things like option select, which I don't think I've even talked about on this channel. Option select ramble coming soon, apparently. But yeah, that's like the history of Roux. And then ZZ, it's a little bit younger than Roux, not by that much. So the method website was published by Mr. ZZ in like 2006. So that means it's been online for over a decade. And then there was also a Polish cuber who posted a thread on, Polish speedcubing forum of some description that I think helped popularize the method more than it already had been. So if we count the start of ZZ as 2008 instead of 2006, it has still been in circulation for a decade, and we have had semi-prominent cubers using the method, or at the very least we've seen people using the method and, you know, getting sub 10-ish. So, like with Roux and like with CFOP, maybe to a slightly lesser extent, but nonetheless, it has been in circulation long enough that there is a very good chance that we know, I'd say like at least 90% of like what ZZ is capable of, and I really just doubt there's any like untapped thing that we just haven't figured out is like really, really fast. Alright, so that's a mouthful already. Now we're going to talk about what I think the best variant of ZZ is. And where is this coming from for me? Well, it's coming from anecdote, and you know why? Because ZZ's been around long enough that we've had enough fast people trying to use the method that I think using anecdotal evidence is somewhat appropriate here. So, who's in the context of two-handed, sorry Phil you, who is the person that has taken ZZ the fastest in competition? Well, funnily enough, it is a Korean cuber, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, I'm very sorry. I believe it's Haeyeon Kyo-kyung. Yeah, that was terrible. So he's third in Korea for 3x3 average. He's only been to 12 competitions. He doesn't really get to compete. According to this, he's only competed once in 2018, which is very unfortunate because he's a very good cuber. I wish more people knew about him. Because in the context of this ZZ discussion, he actually is like legitimately more influential than, I would say, everyone except Phil Yu, honestly. Like, him and Phil Yu are like the only two people who have done like anything for this method whatsoever beyond like the Stone Ages, honestly. So shout outs to those guys, you know, good on you guys. So yeah, what variant of ZZ does Haeyeon, I'll just call him Haeyeon from now on. I'm not going to disrespect his name any further. So what variant does he use? Well, funnily enough, he is mainly a CFOP solver. He has an interest in one-handed, which I believe was why he got into a bit of ZZ. I believe I read a comment on YouTube years ago that said he learned ZZ to practice TPS because having no rotations was a good way to improve his TPS for him. And if you've seen any of his videos, like, the dude is like, I legitimately think he might be like the fastest turner, like, period. It's hard to tell because of the crappy video quality he has for his videos, but the dude can turn. He can turn. Like, goddamn, he can turn. But anyways, what variant does Haeyeon use? Well, he uses Eocross. Yay! Much more basic than block building, but more effective. Ain't that great? Ain't that more good news? Just like knowing your method is good for feet. So yeah, he's used both. So that's most of what you need to know about this guy. He also has held the ASR average back in 2015, which he got with CFOP and not ZZ, because ZZ can't really get records anymore. Yeah, and I believe the fastest official average he's gotten with ZZ Eocross variant is about low 8. And I believe his official single was done with Eocross at 5.91, which is, I believe, the fastest ZZ variant solved by far, officially. And I assume his low 8 averages are better than anything else anyone has done, because if someone was getting sub 8 with ZZ, I swear to God we would have heard about it by now. Surely they're not in the shadows. Surely. If they're getting official sub 8s, we should have heard about them. So, yeah, that's pretty much where I'm coming from. Yeah. And I want to reiterate this again, because I know someone on Reddit is gonna come in here with his pitchfork. Again, because of how long ZZ has been around. It's been around for a decade, at least. It's been known. It's been used by speedcubers. I think we have sufficient reason to accept the anecdotal evidence that Eocross is the best proven way to do ZZ. I really, really, really have little reason to believe there's a breakthrough we've somehow missed. And you know what? I'm going to entertain this idea because I'm that nice. Even if, hypothetically, there is a breakthrough we have all missed, somehow, it doesn't exist yet. It doesn't exist, and there's really no point whatsoever trying to compare CFOP and Roux to a non-existent method. That is not a productive discussion. So, I'm going to go ahead and say that Eocross is the best known variant for ZZ. It's not exciting, it's not glitzy, but it gets you fast times, and that might be what you care about more. Look at my last ramble about mindset and practice. So, now that we have that established, it then becomes a kind of simple question because we've now reduced ZZ to effectively EO cross. It becomes a very simple question when we're comparing ZZ to CFOP. Don't know how it compares to Roux. Someone else can make this video for Roux. Please Keon, please Yuri, someone. It becomes an easy question in regards to CFOP versus ZZ though. Is doing EO before the cross better than doing partial EO before the cross or doing no EO before the cross? Those are the three options. So you can do full EO where before your cross or / during your cross, you orient all your edges. So rotationless F2L and ZB last layer is available to you. The other option is just orienting your F2L edges. And you would still do CFOP last layer, but you would have rotationless F2L. And then there's the last option of no EO whatsoever. You can't just isolate last layer EO but not F2L EO because the rotations and inserts will just mess those edges up. So that's not a real variant. It's either full EO cross, partial EO cross, so basically rotationless F2L cross, we should say, and no EO whatsoever. So we'll go through the steps of CFOP one by one, starting with cross, then a little bit onto F2L, and then finally a little bit on LL, because it really doesn't take long to prove that ZZ is worse than CFOP. I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry. I'm not sorry. Cross, in my opinion, with either partial EO or full EO, the fact that you have to do EO, without a doubt, makes executing and planning your cross slower because there is more information that you have to take into account. So why is this problematic? Well, in my opinion, this is problematic because inspecting first pair in CFOP, in my opinion, is one of those fundamental skills that can basically take you to the next level in terms of cubing. I've seen it happen so many times with my clients where I've gotten them to go from just planning cross to planning first pair and then they just like drop a second. Not like a whole second, but like they like get to that next like barrier just because of that. So I'm a very strong believer of planning first pair and cross in inspection being a very, very, very important thing and a very important fundamental of CFOP. Trying to plan first pair when you're also planning EO, whether it be partial or full, this is going to restrict the options you have in terms of what pair you can choose because you have to do the EO. You just can't. It's got to be done. It's the method. So you gotta plan a first pair that is slightly more restricted, and I don't know if you've ever tried planning first pair yourself with just CFOP. It is difficult. There is a lot of nuance and crap you have to deal with planning first pair. It can be a pain. So having that added restriction in terms of what you can even do to plan the first pair, I think is quite problematic. And then even that aside, because you're planning partial or full EO, you're going to have less time during your inspection. It may not be more than a couple seconds, but when it's 15 seconds, a couple seconds, that's like at least like, 10%-ish. 3 seconds is... I'm not going to try to do math here. I haven't done math in years. I just do cubes. But yeah, those two factors are the main things that make cross a bit problematic with EO cross or partial EO cross. Restriction and less time that you can dedicate to finding that first pair to begin with. So let's move on to F2L. F2L. So with both of these methods, whether it be EO cross or partial EO cross, it's rotationless F2L. That's like the main benefit you're getting. That's kind of why we're doing it. That's the rationale. And this is going to annoy people, especially people on Reddit, but screw it. Rotationless F2L. It's been talked about as long as CFOP has existed. And how long has CFOP existed? Nearly 4 decades. Needless to say, there's a reason it has never caught on at the top level. And I assure you it has nothing to do with Felix or others not being smart enough to realize that PubeCuber420 on the rcuber subreddit was right all along. Rotationless F2L is super overrated. Rotations have benefits, and rotations are not hard to do quickly. On to last layer. And the only comparison I think we need to make here is with full EO cross, because I think by this point we've already proven that partial EO cross is just not worth it, because the cross becomes worse and the F2L becomes worse, and the LL is the same as CFOP. So it's worse. So partial EO cross is worse than CFOP. What about full EO cross? Well, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, the only way EO has a chance of winning, across rather, is with ZB. And this is going back to what I said earlier in the video. So for the 99% of ZZ users who picked up ZZ for the sole reason to avoid learning full OLL, this argument will fall flat on its face, and now you know that CFOP is what you should be doing to get the fastest times. For you. With full ZB, however, I will concede, like I did earlier, that due to getting ZB on a comparatively more infrequent basis with CFOP than you would with ZZ or EOCross, although we don't really need to talk about ZZ anymore because we know it's worse than EOCross, ZB becomes slightly faster when using EOCross because you get it more on a more frequent basis, you have more chances to recall things, and you can just strengthen that muscle quicker and also to a higher level, in my opinion. I think it does actually raise the ceiling on ZB. But at the end of the day, we're talking about ZB here. ZB, guys, ZB. We're talking about less than a second here, in my honest opinion. As such, since the problems I mentioned before almost definitely outweigh the like half a second you might save with ZB, ZZ, whether it be EOCross, partial EOCross, proper ZB, proper ZZ with like the block building EO, the weird phasing thing where you force like half the ZBs, which aren't even the better ZBs generally, ZZ has to be objectively worse than CFOP, thus reducing the big three down to the big two. Woo! So now it becomes a much more interesting discussion in my opinion. What's better between Roux and CFOP? I think that's a pretty interesting discussion because they are very, very different methods, and I think it's very hard to quantify and compare the steps effectively. I know Keon has a presentation on it, and I think it's like the best one there is, but I don't know, it really takes... I feel like it's going to take someone who's gotten to a high level with CFOP and also Roux to really present like any super good intellectual argument. But nonetheless, I would really appreciate it if a high-level Roux solver made basically the video I just made, but with more of a like Roux framework and comparing the steps of Roux to ZZ. I think the main comparison that would be made is the fact that both methods are rotationless and have a large 2-gen aspect to them, although Roux more than ZZ. So yep, that's my argument as to why I believe ZZ is without a doubt worse than CFOP. It could be a bit more comparable for one-handed, but I don't know how much better it would be. I would still think EOCross is the best variant there. And now that I think about it, if you got ZB on lock, EOCross ZZ, it's probably better than CFOP. Actually, I'm pretty sure it is. So then between Roux, ZZ, and CFOP, assuming you learn ZB, and you do EOCross ZZ instead of trying to block build, although I guess block building is a bit easier to finger trick one-handed than it is two-handed, so I don't know. But I mean, ZB's got to be in the mix. CFOP might be like the third best OH method, which is kind of an interesting tidbit. So I guess there's that. But again, this is all framed in the two-handed context, and I think in the context of two-handed, it's the big two. It's Roux and CFOP. And the only way ZZ gets thrown into the mix is with feet, and once again, feet's going, guys. It's long gone. Well, it's not long gone, but it's gonna be. So, yeah, it's just kind of the big two now, guys. I'm sorry. That's it for this ramble. I hope you enjoyed. Please don't cry.